Next up, thanks for your questions. Zach says, Cliff, if you found out God didn't exist, would you still be against slavery?
If I find out that God didn't exist, I'd be a total moral relativist, because I'd have to acknowledge that right and wrong are created by me, and therefore, whatever I'll choose on a particular day, I'll hold to. And if one day I think slavery is good, I'll support it. And if another day I feel slavery is not good, I won't support it.
And that's why I'm better than you.
What is going on, everybody? So glad you made it here, because this one genuinely stopped me in my tracks. We have got Christian apologist Cliff going up against atheist debater Matt Dillahunty on the question of whether biblical slavery is moral. And what starts as a textual debate takes a turn that I did not see coming at all. Cliff ends up answering one question near the end of this clip that completely changes the entire conversation, and once you hear it, you will understand why this moment has stuck with me. Make sure you stay all the way to the end of this one. The final exchange is the kind of thing that is hard to unhear once you have seen it, and I genuinely think it is one of the most revealing moments in any debate I have covered on this channel. Drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are watching from today. I always love seeing how far this community spreads, so tell me your city or country down below. All right, let us get into it.
Next up, 100th Monkey, thanks for your super sticker. Appreciate the support. And Jay Mixon says, Cliff and Stuart, is there any atrocity that cannot be reconciled by appealing to the concept of divine punishment or reward?
If I can just pick on Matt for 1 second, because I know he likes it.
I love it.
Before we get to that, I think the prelude to this debate was one, I laughed at the idea of slavery, but really I was laughing at something else. Matt thought I was laughing. I was glad he got upset. He had righteous indignation about it, and that kind of that was one of the things. The second thing, though, was Matt got this question. I had fallen asleep during the Q&A time, but a question, I went back and I checked it, and the person asked, Matt, you said slavery was wrong because it didn't benefit society in the long term. If slavery did benefit the society for the long term, would it be correct?
Not necessarily.
And Matt gulped for a long time. I was drinking a lot during the debate too.
Oh, sorry.
And if you define correct, Matt said, it was the best for humanity. It turns out slavery was in the best interest for humanity, of course. But it turns out terminal prostate cancer, Matt said, was for the betterment. But we know terminal prostate cancer is not for the betterment because that has never happened. But people have thought slavery has been in the past. And so that was very concerning, Matt, when you did say that. And so I just found that interesting that was kind of the prelude to this debate now.
What was concerning? Because the question that was asked is very similar to the question that was just asked. And I think the answer that I gave is pretty much consistent in that I don't see any way to steel man slavery. But if somebody's case was, what if slavery turned out to be good for us? Of course I'm going to flummox for a while because I can't imagine a scenario where that is the case. However, what we've observed about it being bad, if it turned out that somebody said, yes, there's all these things about slavery that are bad, but there's this other thing that's really good that we haven't discovered yet, and this changes everything, great. As soon as that comes up and it changes everything, I'm happy to try and change my mind. But these sorts of fanciful questions, this is why I went, unfortunately, and I apologize for not giving anybody a warning, but this is why I went to rape. Because I can't imagine a scenario under which violating someone else's consent to sexual intercourse could ever be morally permissible. And
don't forget
what? Move forward.
Why do you have that feeling? Because you need the Bible in order to critique the Bible. And if you don't. If you could say that the Judeo-Christian values where it started in the West and understanding how we got there, James, go ahead. Maybe we'll come back to this.
Judeo-Christian values doesn't care about consent.
Jay Mixon, thanks.
It doesn't treat rapists as if they're victims. It treats rapists as if they're property. That's what the Bible does. No, it does.
Stop that right now.
It's already a video.
Next up, Jay Mixon says, Stuart and Cliff, is there any atrocity that cannot be reconciled by appealing to the concept of divine punishment or reward?
Guys, it's real simple. Obviously, every single human being can create their own definition of right and wrong. All I'm saying is, if that's true, that we create the definitions of right and wrong, then right and wrong are relative. My experience of life is that the abuse of an innocent child is never right. There are moral absolutes, maybe not many, but at least a few. when I say moral absolute, I mean an intangible value that is real and true for every person in every situation. I'm convinced that there are not many of those. There's a lot of relative morality, but there are at least a few moral absolutes. And the only way there can be a few moral absolutes is if there's a mind prior to the human mind that creates and defines those moral absolutes, i.e., there's got to be a lawmaker. There's got to be some type of God.
This question is the one that cuts through everything, because what it is really asking is there a limit? Is there any point where the divine punishment framework just stops working as a justification? And here is what you have to understand about why this matters so much. The entire Christian argument in this debate has been built on one foundation. God defines what is moral, and without God, you have no basis to call anything wrong. That is the argument. That is the whole thing. And this question goes right at the heart of it. Cliff responds by talking about moral absolutes. He says right and wrong are relative without God, but then he draws a line. Cliff said this directly: "My experience of life is that the abuse of an innocent child is never right. There are moral absolutes, maybe not many, but at least a few. And I need you to stop right there, because Cliff just made a massive philosophical move without realizing it. He said moral absolutes exist. He said at least a few things are absolutely wrong, regardless of circumstances. But then his entire argument in this debate has been that without God, there is no moral absolute. That without divine grounding, everything becomes personal preference. So which is it? If moral absolutes require God, how does Cliff know child harm is absolutely wrong? Is it because God told him? Or is it because he can see it is wrong independently of what any text says? Because if it is the second one, if he can look at something and know it is wrong without needing God to confirm it first, then he has just handed Matt the entire argument. And here's what people do not realize about this moment. Philosophers have debated exactly this question for centuries. One of the oldest versions of it goes back to Plato. Does God command things because they are good, or are things good because God commands them? If goodness depends entirely on divine command, then anything God permits becomes moral by definition. But if God commands things because they are independently good, then morality exists outside of God, and human beings can access it through reason. Cliff wants both. He cannot have both. Matt sees it immediately. Matt said it plainly. That's not true. And then he does not even finish the sentence before the next exchange begins, because he knows he does not need to. The contradiction is already standing there in the open.
Next
That's
up,
not true,
thank
but
you
we
for
can
your
have a debate on morality
Funky
another day.
Atheist says, question for Matt and Josh, says the UN doesn't outlaw slavery in its member states and gives them millions in aid every year. Is the UN evil? Does the UN condone slavery?
Sorry, are you waiting for me to go? So I'm obviously not an expert on what the UN says. I thought that there were articles that say that slavery is outlawed, but I mean, I'm not an expert and that's not my field.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I don't know what the UN specific position is. I'd have to go back and look through the UN Charter and other stuff. But there are international laws against slavery. But the question about, is the UN immoral? If the UN tells its member nations that it is legally permissible under UN guidelines to have slaves, then yes, the UN has an immoral position.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for your question. This one coming in from Japexican007 says, yes, slavery is immoral. Like an addict, that's a slave to his addiction. Humans are all slaves to sin. God offers to free everyone from their sins. This is the whole point. Pain and suffering exist because sin exists.
Sin is a nonsense notion, but that's for another debate too.
Gurmania, thanks for your question, said, God gave over 600 laws. Why didn't he just add, thou shalt not have slaves?
Good. Yeah.
I do not know. I don't know why God didn't say child abuse is wrong. I don't know why exactly Jesus didn't say very specifically that certain things that are wrong are wrong. I think it's a little naive to think that Jesus or anybody is going to address every moral situation. And then to conclude that because he didn't address very specifically every moral situation, he's wrong or he's unreliable. Jesus never talked about transgender. Doesn't mean he's wrong or an idiot because he didn't talk about transgender. So, I mean, come on.
But I think that he did. Like if you read through Luke 17, for example, the example that he gives to the disciples is which one of you having a slave serving in the field all day, when he comes in from the field would say, hey, have a seat and have dinner with me, right? No, you wouldn't say that, right? Is the conditional clause there. But you would rather say, get in there and, cook
Make my
meal
dinner
and then serve me and then wait on me while I do it. And then only afterwards. And so the idea that the New Testament somehow has this enlightened position that it condemns slavery, I think is just incorrect. And so much, again, I'd ask everybody to read Jennifer Glancy, read Ronald Charles, even Harrell has, anyway. But
it uses slavery. It uses slavery as a necessary tool because you are to be a slave to Christ. So how can you pamper your own slaves? You are subservient to Christ and your slaves are subservient to you. It sets up a classist system of inequality. It's undeniable in Luke 17 from 7 to 9.
And in another parable, Jesus says there's an unjust judge who doesn't give justice to a woman who's asking him for justice. And the only reason he gives her justice finally is because of her persistence. Now, Jesus says, if that unjust judge will do that, how much more will your heavenly Father give justice to those who ask him?
Which is not in any way a counter to what we said or relevant to slavery.
Not saying, Jesus is using an illustration of the day, an unjust judge. He's not commending unjust judges. He's not saying they're good.
Watch what Stewart does here, because this is one of the most revealing moves in the entire debate. Stewart steps in and tries to argue that Matt's moral intuitions, the very feelings Matt has that slavery and cruelty are wrong, actually come from a Judeo-Christian tradition. The argument is essentially, you think you are reasoning independently, but you are actually borrowing from a worldview that your secular framework cannot justify on its own. This is a real argument that serious thinkers have made, and it deserves a real response. But Matt is ready for it, and this is the part that blows my mind, because Cliff then doubles down and says, because you need the Bible in order to critique the Bible. Cliff said it at 1:45:51. Think about what that sentence is claiming. It is saying that the only valid standard for judging biblical morality is biblical morality, that you cannot stand outside the text and evaluate it by any other measure. But that is exactly the kind of circular reasoning that collapses under its own weight. It is like saying the only valid way to evaluate a court verdict is by the rules of the court that issued it. By that logic, no external review is ever possible. No outside standard is ever valid, which means the framework is unfalsifiable by design. And Matt points out something that cuts straight through it. He notes that the moral tradition Stewart is crediting with teaching human dignity did not actually protect consent in its own foundational texts. Cliff said all human beings are created in the image of God, male and female. And that sounds powerful. But Matt's point is that the same texts that make that declaration also contain detailed instructions for how to own, beat, and pass on human beings as inherited property. You cannot claim credit for human dignity while simultaneously defending the legislation of human ownership. The gap between what the tradition claims about human value and what its foundational documents actually authorize is enormous. And that gap does not close just by pointing to the nice passages.
But I think the distinction here, Cliff, is that he's saying, which of you? In other words, he's not saying, I know you guys have slaves, but you shouldn't have that, right? I mean, he's using it. It's dependent upon it. The rationale of the parable is, I agree with you that the New Testament isn't, like Paul isn't saying, rise up and revolt. I agree completely. The New Testament text isn't laying down legal stipulations like we see in the Pentateuch. It's a much more bottom up, because they're not in power. According to the narrative of the text, in the Hebrew Bible, they're coming from a top down. So I agree with that, but there's nothing in the biblical text that condemns. And I just sorry, James, because Philemon has come up so often. I just want to read something. However one understands the situation being described in the book, we would be hard-pressed to see the book, this is Philemon, as representing an overarching declaration on the institution of slavery. Loza writes concerning this view, quote, "For good reasons, this view," that it's condemning slavery, "has found no acceptance and today is no longer held by anyone. The letter to Philemon is neither the disguise of a general idea nor the promulgation of a generally valid rule about the question of slavery."
Well, whoever wrote that's blowing smoke.
Well, they're not. They're New Testament scholars.
Frederick Douglass, a slave, came to faith in Christ and pointed out
completely irrelevant
very clearly.
I mean, you're fighting consensus
scholarship in America.
Here,
Christianity interpreted by white slaveholders is not fair to the text.
Next,
and
Frederick Douglass
refused to allow
neither Paul nor Frederick Douglass are in any way. Neither Paul nor Frederick Douglass are in any way corrective to Exodus 21.
The original super chat was challenging Cliff, so I do have to give him the last word.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's kind of like I'm ganging up on him.
Actually, I think that's a bullshit rule, but I'm actually okay with that rule
I don't care.
for now.
So
I know.
that's what we're doing. Zach,
Good, James.
Cliff, I'll give you a chance to respond if you want. Otherwise, we're going to go to the next one, which is from Zach.
Well, look, I mean, if we're going to stick with Luke, Josh said Luke 17. I mean, Luke 4, quoting the book of Isaiah, let's set the captive free. Or, for example, let's just look as a doctor. Luke is a doctor in general, he's a Gentile, somehow giving this incredible place of power to even write the book. I mean, the Jews are allowing this. So it's completely desecrating racism to begin with. And there is language of setting the captive free.
Next up, thanks for your questions. Zach says, Cliff, if you found out God didn't exist, would you still be against slavery?
If I find out that God didn't exist, I'd be a total moral relativist because I'd have to acknowledge that right and wrong are created by me, and therefore, whatever I'll choose on a particular day, I'll hold to. And if one day I think slavery is good, I'll support it. And if another day I feel slavery is not good, I won't support it.
And that's why I'm better than you.
Next up.
Well, I'm glad we straightened that out, Matt.
It's a fact.
Let's see. Okay, Christian Holmes. Okay.
Oh, this is it. This is the moment that the entire debate has been building toward without anyone knowing it. Zach asked Cliff a question that sounds simple on the surface. If you found out God did not exist, would you still be against slavery? It is a hypothetical. It is clean. It gives Cliff a chance to say yes. Of course, because I can see independently that it is wrong. That would have been the strong answer. That would have at least shown that Cliff's moral intuitions run deeper than his theology. But that is not what Cliff says. Cliff said this: I'd be a total moral relativist because I'd have to acknowledge that right and wrong are created by me, and therefore whatever I'll choose on a particular day I'll hold to, and if one day I think slavery is good, I'll support it. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not because it is shocking for shock's sake, but because of what it actually reveals about the structure of Cliff's moral thinking. He is not saying he would want to support slavery. He is saying he would have no reason not to. That without God, the only thing standing between him and endorsing human ownership is the continued existence of his belief in God. And here is what makes this philosophically extraordinary. Cliff spent this entire debate arguing that atheists have no moral foundation, that without God, morality is just personal preference. But what he just revealed is that his opposition to slavery is also just personal preference, preference that happens to be shaped by his theology. The moment you remove the theology by his own admission, the opposition goes with it. That is not a foundation. That is a conditional, and conditions can change. Matt's response is 5 words, and those 5 words, and that is why I am better than you, are not arrogance. They are a conclusion drawn from Cliff's own testimony. Matt is saying, I oppose slavery because I can see it is wrong. You oppose slavery only because your belief system tells you to. If that belief system disappeared tomorrow, so would your objection. That is the difference. And it is a significant one. This entire exchange is one of the most honest moments in any debate I have watched on this topic. Not because Cliff is dishonest, but because he answered a hard question honestly, and the answer revealed exactly what Matt had been arguing all along. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.